Welcome back everybody. This is Mohib, your trainer for this entire Spring series. In the last video we talked about Spring Framework modules. In this video we are talking about Spring IOC Container. We learn about what a Spring Container or Spring IOC Container is, and what are the requirements that Spring Container needs in order to perform its functions. So before jumping into today's class, I hope you have liked and subscribed my channel and shared with your friends. Let others stay updated. So let's talk about the first one, that is what a Spring IOC Container is. In fact, Spring IOC Container is a predefined Spring program, or we can say that it is a component. We can call it as a program or as a component of Spring that we can get it while installing or using Spring Framework. We can compare Spring IOC Container or IOC Container to Java JVM. Once we install Java, then we get a JVM, and JVM has its own garbage collector, where Spring IOC is responsible of multiple things, and we can say that the most important things that it is responsible of. The first thing that we can say, it is responsible of creating objects inside Spring. The second one is holding object in memory, and the third one is it is responsible of injecting objects into another object. For example, we tell the Spring IOC Container which Java class is dependent on which class. So we can say that injects one object into another object. So these are the three things that we can mention about Spring IOC. So assume that this is a Spring IOC Container. It is IOC Spring IOC Container, and inside this Spring IOC we have multiple objects, and this IOC is responsible of managing these objects inside IOC. So assume that for IOC Container we tell that which object, for example, this object is dependent to this object, and this object is dependent to this one, and so on. So these all things we have to tell to IOC, so that IOC can handle all these things. The question comes here that how IOC Container can perform all these things. IOC Container needs two important things. The first thing, which is very important, that is beans, and the second thing, which is very important, that is configuration file, which is nothing but XML file. Through beans we can tell IOC that which Java Pojo class to manage, and the second is configuration file. The configuration file, through configuration file, it is the XML configuration file. Here we will show which bean is dependent on which bean. So these are the two important things that we have to give it to the IOC Container. And the next thing what we have here is the Java application. We have the application. Now this application will use the objects that are made by the IOC, which are ready to use. So application will use the objects that are inside the IOC Container, or they're configured inside the IOC Container, and then these will be used by the application. So we can also say that IOC is responsible for object lifecycle. That means from the time of object creation to the time of object destruction. These all things will be managed by IOC Container. And now what Spring Container will do is that it will use the configuration file. Because here we say that which object is dependent on which object, that it will create the object of bean and perform the injection. So these things will be configured in the configuration file. Now that the objects will be used by our application, the question comes here that how this application is using these objects. That's by the interface we have inside our Spring, and the interface actually acts as the IOC. So what are these interfaces? So the interfaces are like the interface is like application context. This is the interface that it performs the that represent the Spring IOC container. This is nothing but an interface. But I would like to say that here we also have a parent interface. Of course, it is a child interface. The parent interface is nothing but Bean Factory. So this is also an interface. This is also one interface. So this interface extends the parent interface, which is nothing but Bean Factory. Talking about application context is nothing but talking about Bean Factory, but this application context interface has not only the property of Bean Factory, but also it has some extra properties. So talking about this one is nothing but talking about Bean Factory. So this application context represents the IOC. So with the help of its object, we can get the value from the container. But the question comes here that in Java we cannot create object from an interface. But can solve this problem by using its implementation classes. Implementation classes are nothing but like class path XML application context. We have annotation config application context, and the next one is file system XML application context. These are the three classes that implement application context interface. So the classes are like what? Like the classes that implement this interface or class path XML application context. This is one implementation class. The next one is annotation config application context, and the third one is file system XML application context. These are the three implementation classes. All these three that I have written here are the classes. Which classes? The implementation classes. The implementation classes of application context. Now we cannot create object of this one, but we can create reference variable of type application context and the object of type class path XML application context, or annotation config application context, or file system XML application context. How we can create like this one: application context, for example, context equals to new class path XML application context. The same thing we can create with annotation config application context or file system XML application context. Now you can see that the reference variable, this is a reference variable of type application context, but object, this is creating object is the implementation class. Because it is an interface, we cannot create object of an interface. So in Java we cannot create object of two things. One is an interface and the next one is an abstract class. And this is the reference variable, and this is the implementation class. Now what is the difference between class path XML application context, file annotation config application context, and then third class is file system XML application context? The first one, which is nothing but class path XML application context, this class searches XML file from Java class path. The first one, this one searches the XML file from Java class path. This means that if the XML file is inside Java class path, which contains all configuration, then we can use the class path XML application context. The second one is annotation application context. That is nothing but it searches for beans on which we have used annotation, and then we'll talk about annotations. So we can use annotations on classes, and once we use annotations, then we use this class in order to create object of this interface. And the third one is the file system. This is the third one, which is nothing but file system XML application context. It searches XML file from file system. This means that if we have the configuration file inside a file, then it will search for configuration file inside the given file. So these are the three important classes, implementation classes, through which we can access to our XML files. In this video we talked about IOC, what an IOC is, and what are the requirements, or which files IOC needs. And we also talked about the interface that represents our IOC, Spring IOC container, and the classes that implement the application context interface, and how to create an object of the application context interface. So this is enough for this video, and hope you have learned about IOC and its interface and its implementation classes. So in the next video we'll talk about a little bit of practicals, how to use the practical, how to perform the practicals, and how to make objects, and what are the injections or types of injections we have, and we'll talk about them. So we'll stop here and we'll continue with the next video, but before that one, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. So till then, goodbye.